Hello and welcome to this member exclusive live stream for our members during this member week as we take a look at something that I described to a lot of our new members as the least interesting, most important topic. That is the financial condition or the financial health of our communities and those underlying numbers that really give rise to the full narrative of how our communities are doing. We live in challenging times, and we live in the midst of really constrained resources, and yet oftentimes that real clarity, that real certainty about what the picture holds for us is often quite unclear. And so this is part of our project today, is to actually work through the Finance Decoder worksheet, as well as hear and understand more of the detailed explanations of what went into it. This has been a remarkable season for the Strong Towns organization team, as we've brought in experts and brought in our own content to be able to demonstrate just what is at stake when we get the numbers wrong, when we misunderstand where wealth comes from and where wealth is bleeding away in our communities. And so, because this is Member Week, one of my challenges for you is that if you feel like this is material that deserves to be in the hands of even more people than those that are gathered here today, or if you're watching this afterwards, go and recruit somebody to join as a Strong Towns member as well. It is our over 6,000 members that have had such a pivotal role in reaching ever greater audiences of people that are decision makers and influencers in their communities. I would say influencers in the non-Instagram version of it, because you're taking note of the needs of your community and you're asking, what can we begin to do in these places about this? Again, this might sound dry, this idea of a Finance Decoder workshop, and yet it's actually amazing to see just the energy and the enthusiasm that you have in coming here. When I told Linda that we had over 117 people that had registered, her eyes were like, whoa, wow, there's more people that care about this too. And to that, there's something really exciting about that. One of the things that I would just want to say is, by way of intro, is at Strong Towns, we've talked a lot about value per acre, and we've provided some prompts for people to assess the value per acre in their communities. And what's amazing is that members have gone and done like full-scale mapping exercises, and they're often iterating on some of those core resources, saying, hey, we can do even more with that. And as I look at the Finance Decoder today, I actually marvel at how it came together. But I'm also fascinated to figure out what you're going to be doing with this. Some of you on the more techie or geeky sides, what you can do to actually take these things and apply them even more broadly and surprise us in doing that and be able to shift conversations in your communities. And so today, I'm thrilled to welcome one of Strong Towns' very best when it comes to doing the math that matters. Linda Twillman is our controller, and she brings decades of experience in corporate accounting and finance into the nonprofit world. She's helping Strong Towns to grow smarter and stronger and to live within our means and to do so in a responsible way. She grew up in Maryland, but now lives in South Carolina, and her passion for good numbers is matched by her love of good books and good food and the timely turning in of receipts. And so we're excited to have Linda's help to help you get the numbers right through this tool that she has had a key role in refining and testing and refining again so that it functions as it does today. Also joining us today is someone who has made a name for himself by making the often boring world of municipal finance not just understandable, but downright fun. He's talking to a group of, I think, city managers or others at the tail end of the day. That's the slot that they've given him, because they said, we want people to stick around for this talk. And this is, I think, exactly the energy that Michel Durand-Wood brings to the question of municipal finance and infrastructure. He writes a blog called DearWinnipeg.com. It's a part love letter as well as a part tough love to his hometown of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Mitch would say he has no formal training in planning or finance, but what he does have is a rare gift, and that's the ability to break down complicated city math in a way that makes you care and want to act. And so Mitch embodies the Strong Town spirit of doing the math, challenging assumptions, and asking cities to make better use of our hard-earned tax dollars. Now, out of this, what I want to do is encourage you in the chat to take opportunity as questions arise for you. If there are things that are less clear or you're prompted about the implications of some of the things that you're hearing, go ahead and share that in the chat. We'll leave time towards the end for this, as well as next Wednesday during our regular Ask Strong Towns Anything sessions, which are at noon Central Time. In that time, both Mitch as well as Linda have agreed to be participants with me in another round of question and answer time. So if there's questions that we can't quite get to today, we'll actually pick those up next Wednesday as well. And just a reminder, Ask Strong Towns Anything is every single Wednesday. It's a members exclusive we could call it a perk, but it's really just this thing. It's like, let's come and hang out and talk strong towns together. You probably have family members that don't want to hear from you on these topics anymore. So we are the people who do want to hear about it from you as well. But to begin, we're going to start with Chuck talking about the impact of our financial decision making over the longer term course of our communities and what it looks like for our places to be vulnerable or to be resilient to the things that are coming ahead of us. And so, Chuck, why don't we start with you on the question of how do we frame this problem and really understand what we're dealing with here?
Thanks, Norm. So I wanted to, before we get too far, I want to put on my Canada hat today. Not only because you and Mitch are proud Canadians, and not only because today's a big day in Canada, right? You guys are out voting today, which is kind of cool. You know, you guys are inundated by all of our politics. We don't get that much of yours, but I am aware that you guys are having a big day today. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that everything that has gone into the financial decoder is stuff that was basically like R&D from Canada. We have taken what were the best practices as put forward by, and Mitch, remind me the name of this organization. It's a Canadian. Go ahead, you say
the Public Sector Accounting Board.
All right. So
yeah.
Geeks in Canada, which are the best kind of the friendliest kind of geeks you can come across, put together this set of standards that Mitch introduced to us and that we have taken and put into the worksheet for everyone here. Some Canadian cities use this, some Canadian cities don't, some hide it in the back of their budget, some ignore it, but these are the recommended best standards from this Canadian group. So we owe a lot to them for this conversation. Let me, I was just gonna, hey, I almost shared the wrong screen. I did. This is our member drive, where we're at right now. This is a dashboard I put together for our team. I know we're gonna share it with members. Hang on one sec. I will share it with all of you. So there it is in the chat. If any of you wanna follow along this entire week with our member drive, this is the inside dashboard that we use. Let me instead share with you this. I wrote an article about Houston, and I kind of wanted to focus on Houston at the beginning here again, because it's such a compelling, not only a compelling American city, but it's the American city that kind of embodies the idea of we can grow our way out of our problems. And the fascinating thing about Houston is that they've had this series of big structural deficits. Things aren't working here. And their local dialogue has been, you know, things are bad. We need to make some changes, but the changes ultimately wind up being, we'll borrow a little bit more or shave a little more here or move a little money into next year and make it work. I thought it was interesting that they called this a staggering $160 million deficit, because when you put their numbers into the decoder, you get a net financial position that is deeply, deeply negative. Let's talk a little bit about what net financial position is. This is essentially a culmination of all the budget surpluses and deficits that you've run over the course of your life. And so when you see 14.6 billion in the negative, what that is Houston has, over the course of its existence, already spent or committed to spending $14.6 billion more than they brought in. This is money that is going to come in the future. And if you say we have a staggering budget deficit of $160 million today, basically Houston, if they do nothing, if they don't overspend anymore, if they kind of get things in order, is going to have that same thing for the next 96 years. So this is not a small little tweak. This is a major, major gap. Our team put together nicer charts showing this. This is the same thing in Houston. We looked at a lot of cities though, and this is Kansas City, New York. What we saw over and over and over again was the same basic pattern. And the amazing thing about this pattern repeated over and over and over again is that with the exception of, arguably the exception of COVID, these were times of economic strength in our country. This is a period of time when the stock market boomed. This is a period of time when unemployment was way down. This is a period of time where the economy was growing, where housing prices were rising, where transactions were occurring, where all of the things that equal city prosperity were, in a sense, all in the green, like all peaking, all doing really well. Yet what we saw over and over again were these structural negatives in city after city after city, growing increasingly weak. And even in the ones where we weren't seeing that downward decline, like Harrisburg in the upper right, I had to laugh at Harrisburg because, they started to move in a different direction in 2012, kind of. They moved from like really, really negative to kind of negative, but never really were able to kind of right the ship. Even the ones where we're seeing things, go not in a negative direction, we're seeing deep, deep struggles. A lot of this comes from, and I think the other big thing that we wanted to try to understand was the infrastructure question that we always bring up at Strong Towns. Our insight, and I guess you can call this the projection that we have had with cities since we began, was that when you accumulate a bunch of transactions in terms of development and growth that are negative, ultimately that ends up in a negative place. You can't add a bunch of negative numbers together and come up with a positive, which is often the math that we use, theoretically when we're doing projects. We wanted to try to understand how much that liability was for infrastructure maintenance. I'm going to tell you, we didn't get that number. That number is not anywhere, and it's not tracked anywhere, and it's not ever really probably going to be tracked anywhere. But what is tracked is an accounting of what something cost at the beginning, and then essentially depreciating that out, how much of its estimated life is left. This is not the exact question we were trying to ask and get answered, but it's close. And when I say close, I am going to say that it overestimates, in my opinion, it overestimates how financially stable the city is. It underestimates the actual promise that the city's made in the future. But even when we look at this, if we start with a city like Houston, we see, in the last 20 years, the useful life of their infrastructure has gone from 67% to 56%. Again, looking at city after city after city, it's the same trend everywhere. It's the same trend overall. Even old Harrisburg started off around 50% and is now down to about 40% of their useful life remaining. These are trends that I think, again, underrepresent the real condition that our infrastructure is in and the real number of promises, in a sense, the accumulated liability, because this starts with a number and then depreciates that out, instead of starting with a liability, recognizing that infrastructure costs are growing faster than inflation, repair costs are growing faster than inflation. All of these costs, when they recur, are going to be even higher than what we are kind of representing here as a percentage. Nonetheless, even with these, what I would say, generous numbers, we're seeing over and over and over again where communities are falling behind, where they are not keeping up. And this is, again, a trend we saw. We analyzed almost 3 dozen cities, might have been slightly less, slightly more than that, around 3 dozen. And we saw the same thing over and over. Last one I just want to talk about before I ask Linda to guide us through this a little bit, because I think this is one of the things that I did not recognize until Mitch pointed it out. And then as soon as he did, I thought, oh my gosh, yes, okay, that makes sense. When we look at the assets to liabilities as a ratio, we take all the city's assets, which again, I'm going to say from an accounting standpoint are a little bit over generous. We take the city's liabilities, which I'm, again, going to say from an accounting standpoint, kind of underestimate their liabilities. There's a lot of liabilities that cities have, promises they've made that are not accounted for on the books, that are not there. When we take those two and we add them up, I think from an accounting standpoint, we recognize if you got so many assets and so many liabilities, you want to have more assets than you have liabilities. That would be a solvent situation. If you think of those, and I don't want to do complex math in front of you, so I'm just, if you take the assets and you divide it by the liabilities, If you have more assets than liabilities, that number should be above 1. If you have more liabilities than assets, that number is going to be below 1. And there's a very simple way. If you look at 1 here, above 1 is solvent and below 1 is insolvent. And so I just, put 3 cities on here, the 3 that we kind of looked at over the course of the series that I wrote. You've got Kansas City that is trending towards insolvency. You've got Houston that is kind of bouncing up above it. And we saw, at the very first slide, what Houston's situation was like. And then you have a city like New York City that just sits insolvent, and hangs out in that territory in a way that, there's no like apparent way you're going to get out of that. One of the most startling things for me was to see over and over and over again how the cumulative choices that we make year to year might seem prudent. It might seem like the only thing we can do. It might seem like the best thing we can do. We might feel like we're in an emergency here, but all of those things add up. And this budget, the finance decoder that we have put together reveals in this way that was startling even to me how those cumulative choices result in these long-term trends that really affirm the things that we've been saying. I mean, since 2009, when we incorporated as a nonprofit. I want to ask Linda to come in now and talk about the actual worksheet that we put together, because the way this all went down is we had a big meeting in Florida. We got a whole bunch of people in. We looked at a bunch of different ideas. Mitch's ideas were like off the charts, bringing this stuff from Canada in and sharing with all of us. We took some time to try to understand that. And then I gave it to Linda and gave it to our team and said, hey, make this into something that we can share with people to make it a little bit easier for them to do it so that their learning curve isn't quite as steep as mine was. Linda, can you take it from here and show us where we're at?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And again, I'm going to talk just about the mechanics of the layout of the worksheet itself, and then how to find the information. And we'll cover more later. And Mitch is actually the expert on all of this. He understands what these indicators are showing and the reports from which they were gathered much better than I do. I don't have much experience or any experience really in governmental accounting. So this has all been a little bit new to me. But one of the things that I thought I was sort of pleasantly surprised by as I started filling this worksheet out for a number of different places is how remarkably consistent the reporting is. And that's because it's in the US, the ACFR report or is based on guidelines established by the GFOA, which is kind of the counter to the organization that Mitch mentioned in Canada. So there's a series of reports. This annual report looks pretty much the same across all municipalities who report it, which was a pleasant surprise. And I think that enabled us to set this up in a way that we could share it and give a little bit of guidance to folks to fill it out on their own, with a couple of nuances. So the bottom line is to get at the trend graphs that get automatically produced. If you're filling out the spreadsheet for the US version, there are maybe about 15 numbers that you need to find for each year. For Canada, it's about 10 numbers. And they're basically in the same places on the reports each year. So again, we laid out the spreadsheet to the light yellow cells are where you're going to enter numbers as you fill this out. Any of the dark blue lines there are formulas embedded in there, so you're not going to touch those. And then as you fill things out, you'll see there are formulas that compute the indicators, either ratios or the net financial position number. They get automatically populated, and as they're populated, the graphs on the results sheet, you'll start seeing the graphs fill out as well. So it's just a matter of entering numbers, and the sort of analysis behind the scenes, the creation of the graphs is done for you. A couple notes just basically about the spreadsheet. Hopefully most of you have been able to access it and create your own copy. The version, it's a Google worksheet. The version that we share is you can't modify for obvious reasons. So the first thing you want to do is make a copy of it, save it with a different name, and then you're ready to go. We have a couple of notes in here. One is there's a link to the instruction sheet, which gives a little more detail about how to fill it out. There's a note here saying this is a good place for you to put a link. I have found that as I'm filling them out, and I'm jumping to the sample worksheet here for Memphis, I've included a link to the page on Memphis's website where all of these files are stored. That's just a kind of a documentation to save your work. It's easier to go back and find it if you've done that. And then this section on rounding is important too. I will make one more note about the sample sheet that's included in here. This was, again, to give an indication or a visual of where these numbers are on the various reports. There's a link here to the 2024 report for Memphis. This is a report that has 367 pages in it. The good news is you don't have to care about 90% or more of what's in that report. There are fewer than a handful of pages that have numbers that we're going to be extracting. And for the example, we've included a link to a PDF picture of the page with highlighted areas to show you where the numbers come from that get entered. So even though the page numbers will be different for different cities, even from year to year, the reports and the tables that you're pulling the data from will look very consistent. And after you've done a couple of them, you'll get a sense of, even without reading the page, knowing what the page looks like and how to find it in the 400 some pages and extract numbers. Back to the input sheet, I wanted to mention again on the rounding. We've found that most cities, most of the reports are rounded to thousands of dollars. That's for ease of reporting purposes. Not all, some report in whole dollars, some report in millions, actually. I think, places like New York and LA rounded millions because they're working in billions of dollars. There's actually one small West Virginia town that rounded to millions. So they had a whole page of single digit numbers, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it's something to be aware of. And I wanted to point out a couple of places to look to make sure that you're picking up the right rounding. And before I even get there, I wanted to mention how generally easy it is to find the reports that you're going to be looking for. This is the search result for a search on Dallas ACFR. And the very first thing that comes up is a link to this page with all of their ACFR reports, or in their case, annual comprehensive report back to 2003. Most places, when you do a Google search, you'll get to a page on their website that looks something like this. It's not always that easy. There are some places that call it a different name, or it doesn't come up in a general Google search. But if you go to the town's website and look in their financial section and search within their website, you should be able to find it too. If not, then the recourse would be to contact somebody at the town and ask for it. But I think in all of them that I've done, and like Chuck said, we've come close to 3 dozen or so. The only place I still haven't found reports for, and I haven't asked, is Newark. So I think they're pretty much widely available. Getting back to the rounding issue, I wanted to show a couple examples. This is one of the reports that we pull information from for the city of Dallas. And in most cases, you'll see what Dallas has done. They tell you right in the chart, in the report title, that it's rounded in thousands. Easy. They don't always say that. Oftentimes, if it doesn't mention rounding, it's reflected in whole dollars, but you can't be 100% sure of that. There's another example, the town of Portland. If you look at, this is the same report that we looked at for Dallas. In Portland, there's no mention of rounding, but if you go back to the introduction to this section of the report, it does specifically say that all amounts in the management discussion and analysis section are represented in thousands of dollars. So they are in fact rounded. This brings me to another point about, for the US, there are two sections of the report that we look at: the MD&A, or management discussion and analysis, and then the notes. And I have run into several times where the rounding is different from one section to another. And in this particular case, for Portland, that is the case. So here, we know from their note that it's rounded to thousands of dollars in this section. This is another page from the same report, but it's a different section. It's the notes section. And I don't know if you can tell, but the numbers presented here have like 3 more digits than most of the numbers on this report. And it's because in this section, they didn't do the rounding. I will say, we've tried to make it so that you don't actually have to do any math when you're filling out this form. But the rare occasion when you would have to do math is if you've got a difference in rounding from one section to the next, because it's important that all of the numbers that you enter are rounded the same way. So what we would do then, when entering numbers from the notes section in this particular case, we would, instead of typing in 25771,937, we would type 25772. And just rounded to the nearest thousand. So again, we're looking for consistency in the way the numbers are presented. And just another point, we assumed for the purposes of the graph that the net financial position, which is the only one of the reports that's actually has dollar values graphed as opposed to a ratio, it's in thousands of dollars. It's important that you select from this drop down in this cell whether the data that you're entering is in whole dollars, thousands, or millions. And then behind the scenes, there's a formula that will get it right on the graph. So just to note that. Another comment that I wanted to make, a caution, if you will, is that oftentimes, well, nearly all of the reports you may have noticed show 2 years for comparison: the current year, in this case 2024, and the prior year for comparison purposes. Frequently, there will be prior period adjustments that don't get reflected until the following year. And this, in the case of Dallas, there's an asterisk. I don't know if you can see it for the year 2023, and there's a note here saying it was restated. So what I found was easier was to, as I was entering data, to work backwards, to start with the most recent year, enter the information for that year and the prior year, which is coming from the same report. And then, so enter 2024, 2023 from the 2024 report. Then from the 2023 report, enter the 2022 data. So you're getting the most recent representation of that year's information. Where there are prior period adjustments, they're not, they're probably not material enough to significantly alter what the chart might look like, but my take is to go with the best data that you have, and that would reflect any prior period adjustments. I'm concentrating mostly in discussing nuances with the US reports. The Canadian reports are friendlier and easier to follow, and they don't have as many kind of nuances as the US reports do. But we did create a report specifically for Canada that has similar, though not identical, input, fewer lines. And again, here there's the example that we used was Winnipeg, thanks to Mitch. So it's basically the same general process, a little bit easier because there are fewer things to have to worry about. The one other thing that I wanted to highlight on the US report, there are two primary sections from which we're getting data, the MD&A or Management Discussion and Analysis, and then the notes to the financial statements. And the information we're pulling from the notes section has to do with the original cost of capital assets that are purchased. One of the nuances of the US reporting is that, and I lost my place on the page. I apologize for that. All of the US reporting shows information broken out between governmental activities and business type activities. And we're interested in pulling the total in all cases. Where this gets a little tricky is in the notes section. Where there are, in the notes section, we're pulling information from the note that describes capital assets. And in this, I think I'm on Portland here, there's the first page that you'll come to has primary government activities information. And there are a couple of different lines that we're pulling off of this report. Then there's another page that shows the business type activities. And there's, again, information that we're pulling here. The way we laid out the spreadsheet, there's a section with numbers being pulled from the government activities page and a section with information from the business type activities page. In most cases, the business type activities are aggregated and presented all together on one page like this. In some cases, and Kansas City was one, and I had it keyed up to go to the page and I messed it up. But they show each of the business type activities separately. So, and I apologize for this.
Brainerd was like this too. Brainerd had
Yeah, there are multiple.
The airport and the public utilities and the park board, and they had like all these different things as separate things. So you had to pull each one and add them together.
Yeah. And I've lost it, but there, the example I was going to show, instead of jumping right down to the business type activities, what Kansas City had was a section called water, which had the same basic report, but there's a section called water, there's a section called airport, and there's a section called sewer. And all three of those would need to be added together to get your total business activities. So that's the second case where you might actually have to do some math in filling out this information. And there are ways to do that. If you're comfortable with the spreadsheets, you could actually insert rows here, just making sure that the sum in this row 26 picks up any rows that you add, or you could go directly into the cell and type equal and just start typing number plus number plus number, and it'll add it for you. So yeah, that's, I think those were all of the cautions that I had. And I'm sure that we'll have questions and we can address those.
Thank
As we
you,
go.
Linda. That's fantastic. And we'll throw it over to Mitch now for the next little bit through a bit of an exercise together with the folks that are in the room. So, Mitch, you're ready and queued up. Let's go.
Ready to go. Let me just remember which screen I'm sharing. Okay.
And isn't this entertaining? When people say, hey, what did you do on your Monday? This is what we got
Yeah.
to do together, folks.
So, okay. Well, I hope I shared the right screen. You are seeing the City of Winnipeg website. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm just going to do two quick examples, do a Canadian example and a US example, just so you get a really quick idea of how we do this. But yeah, step the first, go to your city's website or Google it like Linda said. You'll get to a page that has annual reports. This is Winnipeg's 2023 report. US example I'm using today is the city of Detroit. And so they, like Winnipeg, also have a finance page with financial reports. And right here we have the annual comprehensive financial reports. We got a whole bunch going back to 2002. So this is going to be super fun. So yeah, then you just end up opening up your PDF or however it comes. Couple things I want to point out is there will almost always be, depending on the size of the city, kind of a table of contents to start off. And the stuff we care about in the Canadian example is this report, consolidated statement of financial position, this report right after on the next page, and then we're going to care about the notes. 3 reports. So this is a 100+ page document, and there's like 3 pages we care about. Similar in Detroit, they also have a table of contents on page 4. And likewise, we really only care about a couple of things. We care about the management discussion and analysis, and then we care about the notes to the financial statements. And so in the discussion, the things we're going to care about is this statement of net position, the statement of activities, and then, yeah, like I said, the notes. That pretty much covers it. So like Linda said, I'm going to be hopping back and forth between Winnipeg and Detroit. One little thing I wanted to show is something that's this little award of excellence. You'll find the same thing in Detroit's financial documents. This has been mentioned before. This doesn't say that you have good finances. This says you have a good financial report. And so good to remember that. So we're just going to go skip to that first report that we said before. So this is the consolidated statement of financial position. This is the Canadian version. All the Canadian versions are all going to look like this, and they're going to be laid out exactly in this order. We are looking for just a handful of numbers. We want the financial assets, which is this number. We're going to want the total liabilities, which is this number here, and we're going to want the other non-financial assets, which is this number here. Those all go in here. Winnipeg. Sorry, gotta move my thing here. And so we're just going to add them into. So you can see here, smaller, we can see it at the same time. So you can see 1686720, that's this number. We want to see, 8473958, that's this number here. And then this liabilities is on the same page. So these first 3 numbers are all on the same page. That's this 2855630. And so those first 3 numbers, 1 page. In the Canadian statements, the very next page is where we're going to pull a couple of other numbers. We're going to pull the total revenues. So you can see actual. Oops, sorry, I picked the wrong number here. Anyway, yeah, so this should be 1927704 total revenue. I'll fix that. 1927704. that the right number? Yes. Okay. So that's it. That's the number here. And then we want to know the government transfers, which are on the same page. So we've got government transfers here. So this is operating transfers. And then they're listed, the capital transfers are listed separately here. I've already added them together, but you could put them in the separate line items here so that they add up on their own. And we are like 60% done putting in 1 year of Canadian data. So that's already pretty quick, as you can see. So you can get through this pretty quickly. To find the next couple of numbers, this is where we go to the notes in the financial statements. And so that is this page here. So in the notes, there's a note called tangible capital assets. This is where we're going to pull the net book and the total cost. In Canada, it's so nicely, simple and sorry, this is not in the notes. Sorry, this is in the notes. You have that you can have the net financial, the net book, and they're all added up nicely here. So 2023, this is 8,423,939. That's that number. You can pull it out there, and then there's another note later on for the interest, which is at page 82. And like Linda said, these are going to look pretty identical from year to year. The page numbers won't be exactly the same, but year to year, they're going to look pretty similar. Expenses by object is the report you're looking for. Interest, 62,371, that goes in there, 64,202. We can do 2 years at once on the most recent year. And then the last thing we're looking for will be the total cost of tangible capital assets, which is just our infrastructure. This is usually a schedule at the end. And in this case, it is Schedule 2, which is this one. I'll just turn it so that it's right side up. And again, this one also very much friendlier to look at than what we're going to look at in the US version. Because as you can see, it's all, the totals are all done up in this one column here. So we don't really have to go get a lot of numbers. We just look at this cost balance at the end of the year, and it is this number here. 13,775,041. Make sure you're picking from the correct year. That's the number that goes in here. That's all the numbers that we put in for Winnipeg. So that took us 2 minutes. We can repeat that for 15, 20 years, however long we want to go back. And then we are done. So the US is a little bit more hairy to deal with because they don't add the things up as nicely and as quickly. One of the things, 1, 2, 3, just to go back to the Canadian one, you can see here this net financial liabilities. This is the city's net financial position, and they just do it for us in Canada. In the US, we have to calculate it ourselves. So you'll see what we are going to do here with Detroit. But Detroit, again, we are just going to fill out all the years the same way. The report we're looking for in Detroit, again, from our table of contents, is this statement of net position, statement of activities, and then we're going to want to go look in the notes for some of that infrastructure stuff. Page 14. Detroit also has a nice little award for this financial statement. As they all do, as long as they meet all the requirements of reporting all the information. It doesn't mean that what is being reported is good for the city. It just means that it's there. So we're going to find that report. It's in that management discussion and analysis. Again, you're going to get used to what they look like Linda said. It is all going to look kind of like this. We're looking for total primary government summary of net position. This is what the report's going to look like. There's governmental and business type, which is separated. In Canada, they smush them together so we can see a full consolidated view. But at the very least, we get a nice total column, so we don't have to get too crazy about adding stuff up. I'm just going to zoom in so we can see a little bit better. But again, we're not looking for like a lot of numbers. We really are looking at this point for like top level trends, right? So we're not looking for details. This is to get us asking questions, right? The information is there in the details if we need to, if we want to dig into, if we have questions. But right now we're just looking for top level trends so that we know what to ask, we know where to start looking, right? And so again, similar to the Canadian reports, this is just a straight up number, current and other non-current assets. This is that number we want to put in, 4325871. That's what goes in here. Then capital assets is immediately after 326. That goes in here. Then deferred outflows is the next number, goes in here. We want total liabilities to be our next number. And then we want deferred inflows is our next number that goes in here. And then same as the Canadian report, this next report is like, if not the next page, it's 2 pages after. It's generally the same kind of layout. We're looking for the summary of changes in net position. We get a lot of numbers here. Total revenues 2801,332, that goes in here. Then we want to know our operating grants 494,900, and then our capital grants 168,983. Those are going in here. And then the neat thing about the American report, this is one that's fun, is that the interest is on this report. So 71393. We have done most of the work already. We visited 2 pages, took out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 8 numbers, and we're almost done. Now is the infrastructure numbers, and like Linda said, this is where it gets a little bit hairy. We are going to want to go to, again, the notes. And you'll see the notes. It's the same as the Canadian was, note 1, note 2, note 3. You want to find the note. I think in this one is, they'll be numbered. They may be numbered differently from year to year, but the note you're looking for is capital assets. And like Linda pointed out, this is just a whole lot of detail, and we don't care about detail. We care about top line numbers, but unfortunately we need to add them all up ourselves. Like Linda was saying, also from year to year, sometimes a city will release their numbers at the end of the year. Let's say in 2023, they'll put out their numbers, and then over the next year, they'll realize they had to make some adjustments. Those will come out in the 2024 statements. So I like to pull the 2023 numbers out of the 2024 statement. Always take the most recent year, get the better data. So it's pretty easily laid out in the other sections where it's clear it's 2023 or 2024. In the capital assets, they don't always list the date. Sometimes they say balance at beginning of year, balance at end of year. Know that's what this is, right? This is the 2024 and this is the previous year's numbers. We need to add up all of the numbers. So we need to add up the 2 types of assets that exist. So non-depreciable and depreciable. They will say that total non-depreciable capital assets. You take this number 396, you put that in. This is again another example, like Linda was saying, of not rounding the same way. These are whole dollars, whereas before they were in thousands. So you're gonna need to reduce these into smaller numbers. So this is that 396,594 over here. You want to add that to the total depreciable assets, which is this number here, that goes in here. And then once you've got those in there, this is where it gets hairy. These are the governmental activities. I don't know why in the US you want to separate it all out like that, but generally your business type activities are going to be the stuff like your utilities, water, sewer, parking, that are still part of the city, and they're still reported detailed separately in Canadian reports, but at least they give us the government-wide total. But they make us do the work here, so that's fine. So then you'll in the case like here in Detroit, where it's not just business type activities, they have business type activities, and then they have water fund separated out from sewer fund and transportation fund and public lighting authority fund, and the airport fund, I think, is the last one, non-major propriety airport fund. So you're going to need to add all of those total non-depreciable assets and total depreciable capital assets. You need to add all those numbers together and put them in here. Sometimes with the non-depreciable assets, they may not have a total. They may just list one. If they only have one item like land, they may not have a category total. They'll just call it total non-depreciable or just non-depreciable land. Just know to look for that. And that's that. Once you've got those in, you're done. There are some cities that also have more capital assets for component units. Component units are actually legally separate entities from the city. So sometimes you might have a school system, or you might have an airport, or you might have something that is a separate legal entity. You don't want to include those because those are separate legal entities. They get reported here because the city, in cases where the city mostly benefits from them, they have to report them, but they don't count in the numbers that we're looking for. That's it. So now we've done Detroit, and we've gone back and we've done a bunch of years. I hacked the sheet a little bit to get more years in here. I put in all the years that Detroit had, and I did the kind of the same thing for Winnipeg. At this point is the fun part. This is where you get to see the results. So let's start with Winnipeg and just go through the different reports. So the net financial position, like Chuck explained, this is when you take all your financial assets, all the money you have, and then you subtract all of your liabilities, all the debt, all the money you owe, and you see how much money you have left over. If you have a positive number, that means you have enough money on hand to pay all your liabilities with a little bit left over. If you have a negative number, that means you don't have enough money on hand to pay all your liabilities. So you are going to be forced to create new money in the future, right? And how is that money going to be created? It's going to be created in the future by service cuts, by tax increases, by neglecting infrastructure. And the important thing to remember is this is done. This is past. So you have no choice. That's coming. So a negative net financial position is an indication that you are looking at future tax cuts, tax increases, service cuts, or neglected infrastructure, because that money will need to be made up. In the example of Houston, they're worried about $160 million in 1 year, but they have a $14 billion negative net financial position. That means that money is going to need to be made up in future years as well. Not all at once, but as those liabilities come due. So we're looking at Winnipeg. We did have a little bit of a positive a couple years, about 15, 20 years back. It's been downward since. The interesting thing is, if you keep going back, it was negative before. The thing that made it go up was we sold our electric utility. So, a temporary asset sale let us get back up, but we didn't fix the underlying issue. So we're back to downwards. Financial assets to total liabilities is the same ratio, but this is a relative difference rather than the absolute difference. So this tells us that it's getting worse, kind of flattened out. So it's just getting worse at the same rate. So positive, I guess. Total assets to liabilities. This is what Chuck was talking about being over 1. This is the line of 1 is the literal line for actual insolvency for a city. You can see in Winnipeg, it's a steady downward trend. We're about 6, about 20 years ago. Now we're somewhere around 3. Net debt to total revenue. So this is something that there's a lot of confusion about. Net debt doesn't have to do with your debt. Net debt is just another word for having a negative net financial position. So if you have a negative net financial position, that's called net debt. It's also called net liabilities. It's the opposite of net assets, which is a positive net financial position. So this is not the same thing. So this is what we're measuring here. Is how big is this hole relative to how much money we bring in a year. And so you can see in Winnipeg, it is getting to be a larger portion of our income every single year, which means it's going to take a lot more work to turn this ship around.
Let me say it differently, because I struggled with this one too a lot,
Sure.
Mitch.
Yeah.
If you are New York City or Houston, you can have a lot of debt because you have a lot of money coming in. If you're the little town of Brainerd and you've got, debt, it's going to be really small in size compared to a big city, but not necessarily compared to your own budget. And so what this does is it kind of normalizes it to the overall size of your revenue stream. If you're a big city, you can have a little bit more debt than a smaller town because you've got a lot more revenue coming in. That's a fair way to say it?
In absolute terms, you can have larger debt because you have larger income, right? So this is, like you said, normalizes it. It shows it as a percentage of your revenue. So if your net debt, if your net liabilities, if your net financial position is a negative number, but it's like 2% of your revenue, I mean, you can take care of that in a year, right? Increase taxes
Right,
by
not a big
2%,
deal.
increase taxes by 2% next year, good, that's gone, right? But if you're starting to get to 20, 40, 50, 80%, in some cases, it's 100 or 200 or 300%. Like that you can't take care of that in a year. That's going to take a very long time and a lot of pain to get through, right? So that's
That's right.
yeah. So
And
let's go.
can you
Yeah,
also explain the elements of sustainability, flexibility, and vulnerability? Just
yeah,
to recap those,
yeah.
Chuck, in your
So
article, you touched on that, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so these four indicators that we just went through, these are sustainability indicators. These are telling us whether we can keep up what we're doing forever, right? Or are we able to continue doing this forever? So a downward trend means no, right? We cannot continue doing this forever. An upward trend tends to be yes, the flat or upwards, right? You can have a flat line for your net financial position hovering just above zero. That would be fine, but you got to understand how money flows on a balance sheet and how infrastructure is paid for. Infrastructure is going to get paid for out of your net financial position, essentially, right? So if your number is negative, you're going to need to borrow more money to do it. If it's positive, you've got a bit of cash that you can use. You might need still to borrow. And so if it stays flat, because of construction inflation, you will never have enough money, right? So essentially, because of construction inflation, you need an ever increasing pot of money. Because every year that whatever infrastructure you're paying for is more and more expensive. So this line is just going to continue, should be going upwards to be truly, truly sustainable. So that is what sustainable means, right? So if we can do this forever, and that is the point of the city, we need to do this forever, and so we can see these trends pretty clearly. We don't know where the bottom is. It's hard to know ahead of time where the bottom is, but that if it's heading downwards, you're gonna hit bottom at some point where you've reached the limits of what you can borrow or what you can do. The next set of indicators are flexibility indicators. So these are essentially, if you are in a position where you are not acting sustainably, how much flexibility do you have to change course, right? Or how much flexibility do you have to weather hardship or change of circumstances? So two of these that we look at are the interest to total revenues. So how much of your income is dedicated to interest payments? This is an important thing because interest is the first thing you have to pay for, as a city. When you take on debt, you are promising that the first thing you will do is repay that debt. If there's money after that, then you can have services, right? And you can have, et cetera, and infrastructure and all that stuff. But the first thing you have to do is interest. And so the more interest we are paying as part of our revenues, the less flexibility we have, because those are dollars we can't spend on other stuff. In Winnipeg, we see we're kind of started around 5%, but 20 years ago we kind of leveled off from between 3 and 4%. A lot of this is not due to having less debt. It's due to being in a much lower interest rate environment. So a lot of our old debt or new debt is at more favorable interest rates. So again, this is good to look at as a beginning. This is not an end, right? This is to let us ask questions to be like, why is this trend doing this? What is the cause of this trend? And this is telling us we have a little bit more flexibility than we had 20 years ago. But we now recognize it's not because we have less debt. We actually have a lot more debt. It's just at a much lower rate. Likewise, we have this is infrastructure ratio. Tangible capital assets is just a fancy word for infrastructure. We want to know what is the ratio between what it initially cost us and then what it is worth today, right? How much of our infrastructure have we used up? I zoomed this one in to get a better sense of the trend. It's basically when you zoom out, you can see it as a gentle downward trend, which is basically what we see for all the cities. But yeah, in Winnipeg, we can see it's basically a downward trend. We were around the 62, 63, been up to as high as 64, but for the last 12, 15 years, it's been a pretty steady downward trend. You're going to get sometimes these like up and down based on when your city grew, when you had rounds of infrastructure that you built. And so you get these maintenance echoes that come back that you might have this up and down. But when you zoom out and see that it's a steady downward trend, then that tells you something that you should be asking questions about. And then the third type of indicator, vulnerability indicators. This is how vulnerable you are to decisions that are not under your control. So whenever you're taking money from the state, the province, or the federal government, that is money that you don't control. right? Some other entity, some other legislature, some other Congress is deciding where that money is going and in what quantities. And so this is going to be super interesting when we talk about Detroit. So the larger a portion of your budget that this is, the more vulnerable you are to outside decisions that are outside of your own control, right? So Winnipeg was about 10% about 20 years ago. We're well above 20% now, into 25% range. A quarter of the budget comes from other orders of government. That's a vulnerable position to be in, because if grants get cut, you're kind of stuck with what you're stuck with, right? And that can cause issues down the line. So Nathan was the one who suggested we should do Detroit. So I could not resist. So we'll do Detroit. So this is cool. The budget decoder only goes to 2009, but I hacked it to go to 2002 so that we get all the years that Detroit is published. And so yeah, so like now we're looking about 22 years worth of data on Detroit, the last 22 years, 2002 to 2024. So that gives us the pandemic, that gives us the 2008 financial crisis. It gives us also Detroit filing for bankruptcy protection, and it gives us a little bit of time before that as well. So this is like super interesting. But what we can see here is their net financial position was negative, about $2.5 billion in 2002, steady line downwards. This is where they filed for bankruptcy protection. Fiscal 2014, July 2013 was fiscal 2014. So it went up a little bit because they got creditor protection. 2015 is when they emerged. 2015, 2016 is when they emerged from that protection, and then, wrote off a whole bunch of debt, offloaded some of their assets into a separate entity. And so this is what this big jump is. So this is kind of important to note sometimes in your city. If you have big jumps like this in some years, it is not necessarily because your city did something, particularly good or bad. It is generally going to be some major event having caused it. Either you sold your electric utility like Winnipeg did in 2001, I think, or in this case, Detroit restructures their debt. It could also be a change in how things get reported in the financial statements. I think Brainerd, for example, in 2023, 2022, they changed how their utility gets reported, and so that had an effect on the net financial position, gave a big jump. So it's not that there was a big change, it's just something that explains that. So like I said, this is to let us answer questions or ask questions. So yeah, so after bankruptcy, we can see that Detroit has kind of just hovered around the same place, still way negative, $2.5 billion, not, kind of just flat. When we look at it as a ratio, we can see that it's flat, but it's getting better at a better rate. Or it's not worse, it's worsening at a slower rate as we go over time. This is the fun part. This is that ratio that goes below 1, insolvency. We can see that Detroit was actually insolvent as of 2010. Kind of we saw with Houston. Houston has become actually insolvent for a couple of years. That happened to Detroit as well. 1, 2, 3 years, 4 years even. And then they filed for creditor protection. And then after they emerged from bankruptcy protection, they're back to solvent, but not going in a very positive trend anyways, kind of just flat. Here we're going net debt to total revenues. This is what we're talking about, percentage. When your net financial position is as a percentage of your revenue, we're talking about 2-3%. It's pretty easy to take care of. But when you're talking about 20, 30, 40, 80%, it gets harder. Winnipeg was at, where were we? 60, 80%. But if our budgets hold for 2025, we will be at about 100%. We can see that Detroit was at 100% in 2002, and it kept going up until, and basically they restructured. It's back to 1, gotten a little bit lower, but we're still not anywhere near where we need to be.
It's really fascinating that they were like technically only insolvent for a short period of time.
Yeah. However, what's interesting is that we could see it coming.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this is the trend, right? And this is the trend.
But I think about like Kansas City and Houston, like we showed. I mean, it's These places are no different.
Yeah. And so here's the thing is you can be insolvent and still continue to operate, right? And that's
Right.
what we've seen in
Right.
Houston, and that's what we saw in Detroit for a couple of years,
Well,
right?
you've seen that for decades in New York City.
You see it for decades in New York City. What is the
Right.
difference? Well, we're gonna see a little bit of we're gonna get there, but yeah. So again, interested total revenues has been kind of all over the place. They were like, between 2 and 3. They hovered a lot between 4 and 6. Now they're back to between sort of 2 and 4. This just goes to show, again, this is regardless of 2007 when the financial crisis, and then again here COVID, like interest rates going down. This is not necessarily representative of debt. This is representative of interest rates. But yeah, again, you can see even going up to 6%. Things are still, that's the thing with debt. It's manageable until the day that it isn't, right? And so there is no one number that you should be aiming for, but that the higher it gets, the less flexibility you have to adapt to stresses. And remember that stress. So again, this is our infrastructure in Detroit. Steady line down, same as everybody. Filing for bankruptcy, restructuring all the debt had zero impact, and that's not surprising. They've of course had to abandon a lot of infrastructure, and that's reflected here. They're just not going to replace that. That's just going to continue to go down. They were at 20 years ago about 65%. Today they're 45-ish% remaining life in their infrastructure. So this part hasn't gotten better, even if we saw that a slight improvement in net financial position here. The infrastructure issue has not gone away, and it's not going to. Here's the one that I thought was super interesting. Government transfers to total revenue is hovering around 20-25% for a lot of years. And then in 2011, 2012, all of a sudden, government support drops.
Wow.
Now you'll see that we go back to our here. What happened here? 2010, 11, we were insolvent. But we were still going for a while, but eventually those government grants didn't come back up. I'm not saying that's the cause, but that Detroit did not have the flexibility to be able to
Adapt and overcome.
adapt to that shock, right? To that shock of a lot of losing a bunch of revenue that they depended on, that they had no control over.
I mean, that's a 10% budget cut over 2.5 years.
Yeah, it was a
couple of years.
Massive. Like I can't remember the exact numbers, but we can go back and look at them. Operating grants and contributions in 2010, right? We went from from like 300 million, 278 million. Like it went from $500 million to we're reductions in small amounts relatively, 50 million, and then 100 million, and then 2014, this is the year where they had to file for bankruptcy, right? So we can see a big difference between 279 million and 522 million in a year. That's going to have an impact, and it's money they didn't have control over. So yeah, the thing that I stuck out to me really stuck out to me is the thing that Strongtown says a lot is Detroit's not unique. They just got there first, right? And we can see these trend lines. We saw them in Kansas City, we see them in Memphis, we see them in Houston, we see them in everywhere. We see them in Winnipeg. But when we talk about where the actual numbers are, Winnipeg 2025 has a lot in common with Detroit 2002, right? Detroit 10 years before they had to file for bankruptcy protection has a lot in common with Winnipeg today. And we're looking at where we are in interest and total revenues, somewhere between 3 and 4%. That's where Detroit was in 2002. When we talk about net financial position, we're like at the end of 2025, we're projected to be around -2 billion. Detroit was at -2.5 billion in 2002, right? When we talk about where government transfers to toll revenues is, 20 to 25% is where Detroit was in 2002. 20 to 25% is where Winnipeg is today, right? It's not that Detroit was unique. They just got there first. And when we look at that, when the suburban development pattern started in North America is, post World War II is when it really got going. But post World War I is when it really got going in Detroit, right? 20, 25 years before, right? And so I think, can expect, unless, we start making some major changes, that we're going to see more cities, not necessarily file for bankruptcy, but really start to struggle under the weight of their past promises. So that, I don't know, I could talk all day about this, but yeah, I don't know. Let's stop sharing and
Mitch, let me ask you one question before we pitch it back to Norm. And I'm watching the member count. We're up to 17 new members since we started, and the member count, I know we've had a couple members renew who don't necessarily show up as new members, but show up as renewing, and it counts on the member count. So we're up to 6,090. Mitch, I feel like there's a communication question here. We put together this information, but I think you and I both agreed that ultimately this is something City Hall should be doing. This is something that elected officials should want to see. This is something that city finance people should want the people to know. This is something that should be included in financial reports. What in an ideal world, here's the question. In an ideal world, where does this stuff live, and where is it part of our dialogue?
Yeah, so city finance staff should be preparing this. This is like in Canada, like we talked about, the Public Sector Accounting Board. The equivalent in the US is the Governmental Standards Accounting Board, GSAB. They determine what the reporting standards are, what's mandatory to report. But these metrics come from an additional document that they have called Statement of Recommended Practices. So these are things that aren't mandatory, but they're like, hey, we really recommend that you do this. And so it should be part of annual reporting from cities. And this is not magic stuff. These are just balance sheet ratios, right? So these are the kind of things like in business, they do these on corporations, right? These are current ratio, quick ratio, debt to asset ratio. Like that's the same thing, but for municipal government or even state or provincial governments. I've seen the province of Nova Scotia use these in some financial reports. And so the idea is that it's not just like we're using this just to show the graphs, and then we have a little explanation. But the idea is, if you're a city that is producing these, you should be able to show the graphs, but also provide kind of a contextual discussion as to why these are trending in this direction, what could be the cause of this jump, so that elected officials and the public and local media can have a robust discussion about where we're headed as a city, and what are the impacts of our decisions, right? We don't have that information. Like, we can argue that the information is all there, because it is, like, all the details are there, but really, we really need to see what the major trends are so that we know even where to start digging, right? Otherwise it's a needle in a haystack. So this is just a recommended thing. Most places in Canada do not use this. This has been a recommendation since 2009, so 15, 16 years. Winnipeg did have it starting in 2009. They were very gung-ho, we're going to do this. But the problem
Things started to go bad.
They were showing bad results, and rather than owning up and facing up to it and having the hard discussions, they just stopped including them in the reports. The other thing that's important to remember is also the format matters. I mean, accountants love tables, I guess, and they also love bar charts, but this is like, we're looking for trends. We need line charts. We need, and of course these are long-term trends. So the document recommends 5 years minimum, but I recommend like 15, 20, like as much data as you can do, because you really need to see, especially the last 5 years have been a global pandemic, right? So how do you explain those trends? So you need to see them in the context of the past 15, 20 years. And so, yeah, so I think this is where, I think as Strong Towns advocates, as members, we can do this, and we have this tool because it's not hard, as you saw. Like we can get it. You want to use the best data you can, but if you make mistakes, so what? If the city, as city finance guy is like, wow, yeah, this is all wrong. Like,
Then
great,
do it.
you do
Yeah.
it. You do it then.
Help.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, help us, right? Yeah, this is, like I said, it's not voodoo, it's not magic. This is accounting, right? And it's used in
Yeah.
a lot of different places. So yeah.
So Norm, I think maybe it's important to say when I hand it back to you that this is something we've been doing some R&D on for a while. I think right now, getting all the crowdsourcing, people doing their own, the next step for us is going to be, I think, some more R&D. How do we make this tool? I mean, we've looked at using AI to scrape some of these numbers so people don't have to even do that part of it. The AI is not quite there yet, and these reports are a little funky, so it's kind of hard, but I think we will ultimately get there. But taking many, many different cities and kind of aggregating them and then adding like population and different things so we can look at them as trends and answer some of the questions that people have had. Like, what's a good number? What's a bad number? What's this? I think there's some more storytelling here to do that we will be into. But Norm, why don't you take us home?
100%. And so an encouragement is for those that are attending right now, go to strongtowns.org/decoder and add your worksheet as well. We do ask that you upload it in a Google Sheets format, and that is the simplest way. There's instructions there that are on there. That's an awesome way to do it. For those that are catching the recording of this on YouTube, and you're like, hey, I just watched an hour and a half of this and I want more, head to strongtowns.org/decoder. That's where all of these resources live. And again, you can submit your materials there. Like I said, for all of our Strong Towns members, and we see a growing number of them today, especially at the start of our member week, if you go to strongtowns.org/ASTA or Ask Strong Towns Anything, we actually do sessions on a weekly basis, taking up the various questions that people are challenged by in their communities, as well as sharing the stories that you are experiencing in your places. And then lastly, for something very different, I want to invite everybody to drop in during our 4
What is
hour.
this?
What's that?
I said, what is this, Norm? What is this craziness?
We're calling it our 4-hour mega stream. And it is probably going to be, actually, no, I know that it is going to be really interesting. It is not an endurance sport, so you don't have to be there for all 4 hours, but you can, because there's going to be giveaways and trivia. You'll be able to hang out with Chuck as well as with others. And it'll be very different, a lot less math. And I think it'll be really good as well. And then I just want to give a tip of my hat both to Linda and to Mitch, and then to you as Chuck as well, just for doing a great job of introducing these ideas in a way that really helps. When I pitched the idea, let's do a worksheet workshop, it was sort of like, say that several times fast, and you already get the experience of what we're going to have to go through. And yet this was a lot less painful than I thought it was going to be, and actually so revelatory in so many different ways. So Linda, hats off to you, Mitch, as well, just for continuing to raise this. It's so awesome to see already, even in the chat, the descriptions of what David in La Plata, Maryland is doing with his city council members, what other people are doing. Brian heading to the municipality to take photos of old records in order to be able to provide a longer timeline of what's occurred. All of this is part of that Strong Towns spirit to say, let's observe where we're struggling. And I think even in our financial house, let's find ways to really know what our current conditions are and then go and make them better. And so with that, thank you all for being Strong Towns members. For all the folks that are here, this was a member exclusive event. For those that are watching, respond to the call to become a member this week in particular. We'd love to have you continue to be part of not only putting these resources into your hands, but as we see in the chat and other discussions, into the hands of so many more people, making this just the default way that we approach the challenges that we're facing in our communities. And so with that, I'm so grateful for the time that we could spend together. And I hope that as you do the math, that it not only reveals many things, but also points forward to a path to a longer term, more sustainable future. Thank you, everyone.